just got a new. We're good. I just got a. We just got a notification. Everything's good on Facebook as well. Don't get sassy with me. Seven.
It says women will save the USA.
Yep.
Today, women make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics. Yet we remain marginalized in government and elective office.
It's important for women to have a voice in this democracy because we see women being disproportionately affected across our society in so many areas.
The reality is the news industry is already gendered. The 19th is working to level the playing field.
Our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk, the recognition of the omission of certain women from the franchise, from access to the ballot.
We are firm believers that all issues are women's issues. Our readers are people who care about those issues, who care deeply about the intersection of gender, politics, and policy, and want a more nuanced approach to that politics and policy journalism.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th.
With live events and interviews, the 19th is fostering civil conversations and community building that brings our readers into direct contact with the people who represent them.
There's never been a Black woman governor in American history.
I think that our newsroom being as diverse as it is, it means that we're looking and telling stories of women that maybe had not been previously represented in media before.
Our goal is to launch the first newsroom that is truly reflective of the nation's women.
There's more women running now than ever have been before, and people want to be informed.
Because what we know is that women are eager to have conversations about politics and often do not feel like they have a safe space to do that. We want to create that community for women, and we want to create that community for women everywhere.
Newsrooms need to be more inclusive. They need to better reflect their communities. The 19th has the opportunity to do that from the ground floor, and we're not wasting that opportunity.
There's never been a better moment than right now.
The 19th is the newsroom that we've been waiting for.
And welcome to day one of the 19th Represents, a week of virtual events aimed at raising the voices of women who are reshaping the American story. My name is Emily Ramshaw, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the 19th, a brand new nonprofit newsroom that launched last week at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. We founded the 19th to shine a light on the unfinished business of the 19th Amendment, which gave some, but not all women, the right to vote a century ago. This week, we'll celebrate that voting rights centennial while reflecting on how far we have left to go. We've got some extraordinary programming in store for you over the next several days, from keynotes with Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Melinda Gates, and Elise Stefanik, to performances featuring the Go-Go's, the New York Philharmonic, and Meryl Streep. Today, we'll be featuring women who smashed the glass ceiling in electoral politics, policy, and the arts. We'll kick off with two incredible keynote conversations. The 19th's co-founder and publisher Amanda Zamora will interview U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada and U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, both of whom broke incredible boundaries to be elected to office. Then we're lucky to get a performance from the Go-Go's, the first all-female band that wrote their own songs and played their own instruments to top the Billboard charts. After that, we'll hear from four more women who represent firsts in office, including former New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez, Virginia Delegate Danica Roem, Congresswoman Deb Haaland of New Mexico, and San Francisco Mayor London Breed. Before we begin today's programming, I want to thank the sponsors and philanthropic partners who made this week possible. Goldman Sachs, Intuit, The Impact Seat, the Lenfest Institute, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wincoat Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Stardust Fund, PEN America, the Heinz Endowments, CVS Health, the Panacea Collective, Aero PR, and Lingua Franca. I also want to let you know that the 19th is a member-supported newsroom, and we can't put on great free programming like this without your support. We hope you'll join us at 19thnews.org. Every $19 helps. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague and partner Amanda Zamora for today's first keynote conversation with Catherine Cortez Masto, who in 2017 made history as the first Latina ever elected to the U.S. Senate. She's also the first woman elected to the Senate from Nevada.
Welcome to the 19th Represents. We are so thrilled to have you here today to help us kick off our summit. As Emily mentioned, we are beginning the week with a series of conversations on political firsts. You are the first Latina elected to the U.S. Senate. You are the first woman that Nevada has sent to the U.S. Senate. But I'm actually curious if you could tell us about a first that is meaningful to you, either professionally or personally, that we don't already know about.
Well, some do know. So this was important in my family. When we were growing up, education was important for my parents. My mother didn't go to college, graduated high school. My father did not graduate from college. He went a couple of years, but did not. So education was important in our family. And it was very clear, made very clear that my sister and I were going to graduate high school and then go on to college. So we are the first in our family to actually graduate from college, my sister and I. And that was important. I think it was important for us, but it's important for my parents, right, who worked so hard and put us through school and my father worked all the time. The only time he was off on Sunday was home with the family. And so, and I had a mother who worked during the day as well. So I think that was important for them as well as us. And then I was the first to go to law school, to be an attorney in the family. And I think firsts are important. I do believe that in general, don't be afraid of it. I think it's okay to be that first, that trailblazer. My only comment is do not be the last. That means now you have an obligation to help others along. Open that door, don't pull up the ladder, keep people moving through that door along with you. So that's how I look at the accomplishments over the years. I didn't do this alone. You know, I stood on other shoulders, and I think we all have to remember that.
Let's talk a little bit about what that ladder looks like in your career. You know, you're the granddaughter of a Mexican immigrant, and you've talked a lot about your heritage as a Mexican American, how important that has been for you. But some of your political rivals have accused you of, quote, Hispandering in the past. And I would really like to know what it was like for you to run in that environment in 2016 as a Latina, and what would you tell to other women of color who are considering running for office in a time like this when it can be pretty difficult to run?
You know, and let me just say, 2016 was a time when we had this administration, this president running, and he was calling all Mexicans rapists and killers and drug dealers. He was dividing our communities. He was pitting Latinos against others, which was just outrageous to me. And, you know, I grew up with a father who literally wanted to do everything he could to shelter his two daughters from the challenges that he faced as a Latino, right? And that his parents faced. My grandmother grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, the oldest of 13. She did not have an easy life. When she met my grandfather after he came from Mexico and had served in the military in the United States and become a United States citizen, they married and moved their young family. My father was 5 at the time, to Las Vegas. But it was a tough time. It was a time when being a Mexican, particularly, people looked down on. I mean, listen, you look at the history, you can see signs, particularly in the West, in certain portions that said no dogs or Mexicans allowed in this establishment. I mean, so when my family came to Las Vegas, part of what they committed to was to assimilate because of what they were dealing with. And that's why my sister and I, when we grew up, we didn't speak Spanish. My mother's Italian and my father's Mexican, was fluent in Spanish, so was my grandmother and my grandfather, but it was in a time of assimilation. Was important for them because of what they were dealing with at the time. But to me, that doesn't take away from my heritage and who I am. I literally grew up with a Mexican father and grandmother who every weekend, it's tradition in a Mexican family. It's all about family. We go over, my grandmother would be making tortillas and chile rellenos and frijoles, and we would have Sunday meals there, and church was important for us and growing up. And so to me, that's who I was. So whatever anybody's going to say against me is not going to take away what I know, what I grew up with, and who I truly am. And that's what I tell people. You know, unfortunately, there's some hate, not enough love out there. And under this current administration who continues to want to divide us, we see more and more of it. And I just want to tell women in general, be true to who you are. You know who you are. I'm confident who I am and where I'm from. And nobody's going to take that away from me, no matter how much they want to call me names or or whatever actions that they want to take. And I think that's what that confidence in knowing who you are, particularly for women and young women starting out, I think that's important, and that's what you bring with you, and nobody can take that away from you.
All right, Senator, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what practical advice you have for women who might be considering running. We've gotten several questions actually from readers along those lines. Renee Shannon from Santa Monica wanted to know, how can female U.S. senators encourage others to be brave enough to run the highest offices in our land? And adding to that, I'd like to know, why did you decide to take your name out of the running for the VP position?
Well, first, let me say to Renee, here's the one thing I know as somebody who has worked in giving back in our communities my entire life and then running for office. The one thing women do is question whether they have the ability to run. We always look to say, okay, let's check the box. Do we have the experience? Do I have the background? Am I ready to do it? Do I have the education? Men don't think that way. Men just say, I'm going to jump in. This is a race that I'm interested in. I think I can do it. I'm going to do it. More women have to have confidence in themselves and know if they're thinking about running for office, do it. Do it. You will get the support. There are so many women organizations out there that want to support other women in various positions in government. And I think it is so important. We need to have more women engaged, because when we have more women engaged, particularly in government where policies are formulated and made, we help to inform those policies. And those policies are better informed because they represent then all of us and not some of us. You know, in Nevada right now, we have a majority legislature of women. We have a Supreme Court that is a majority of women. We have 2 U.S. senators that are women for the first time in the history of Nevada. And I think Nevada thrives because of it, because now you're having more perspectives at the table that are important to inform that policy and those decisions that are so crucial for our community, because we don't want to leave anybody behind. And that's why I'm a big proponent of diversity in general. We need to have so many more people involved in the process. So for young Latinas or any young woman who wants to run, I say, if you've got the passion and that's what you carry with you, and there's something that you are committed, you want to make change, or you want to get involved in, and running for office helps you address whatever that issue is, then go for it. And I am happy to talk with you about it, or connect you with the other organizations that are out there. And then for my purposes in my career, and this is what I talk to my interns, because I think mentorship is key. I think it's so important that we mentor other young adults and talk to them about the opportunities and bring them along with us so that we're opening that door even further. But one of the things that I always tell them is not only follow your passion, don't be afraid to be the first, but do what you believe in and what gets you up in the morning and excites you. That's what you want to, that's the job you want. That's where you want to be. Then you know you're on the right path. And for me right now, what excites me is being in the United States Senate. This is where I know I am supposed to be at this point in time, fighting for my state that is so hard hit during this pandemic, making sure we're doing everything we can to, and where I am as I chair the DSCC as well, bringing back a Senate that is going to focus on the policies that matter to all of us. Right now, the Senate's broken. And now we need to put people in charge here that are really going to focus on those policies that bring all of us along. So that's why I am committed to staying here.
I definitely want to talk about November and what the DSCC is doing, but first, I'm glad you touched on the pandemic. I want to talk a little bit about that. You serve on the Senate Committee for Indian Affairs, and we know that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected people of color, women of color. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about how Native Americans have been impacted and what you are trying to do to support Native populations?
Yes, thank you. So in Nevada, there are 23 federally recognized tribes just in the state of Nevada, and there's so many across the country. And for me, my work with our tribe started when I was Attorney General, and realizing that the federal government, who has an obligation, not only because they're sovereign nations, but made a commitment from their healthcare to Indian affairs, just to public lands in general, to work with our tribes, has failed, literally failed. And so when I got to the Senate, the first thing I wanted to do, one of the committees I wanted on was Senate Indian Affairs, so I can address from the federal perspective what still needs to be done. So my fight continues, particularly during this pandemic. We've already seen right now in our tribal communities where the federal government has fallen way short on the areas that I just talked about: healthcare, education, and housing. I mean, there's a number of issues. And so for me, the pandemic has even kind of shined a light on not only that disparity, but now it has created even more of that disparity and lack of health care. Geographically, sometimes our tribes are challenged to even get access to health care, nutrition, right, food, substance, whatever it is that they need. And so right now, the goal is to get them those resources and that relief. When I'm here fighting for legislation and federal relief to go into our state and local governments, part of that is to go directly to our tribal communities as well, to their tribal governments, so that they can focus on their healthcare needs during a pandemic when many of our tribes have shut down. They're sheltering in place. They've shut down any access to or from some of the tribal communities in Nevada and across this country. And they need PPE. They need access to healthcare. They need the test kits, let alone nutrition and meals that are necessary. So that's where my fight has been with some of my colleagues, to make sure that tribal communities are not left out when we are passing legislation here at a federal level to bring needed relief. And that's what I will continue to do. But let me touch on something, because it's not just the tribal communities that are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. It's the Latino communities. It is African Americans. What we have seen across the country is communities of color are being disproportionately impacted. And that, again, is a fight where we need to not only recognize it, collect the data, then start sending the resources that we need into those hot spots, into our communities of color. That's the work that is so crucial right now in the Senate.
Senator, backing up, speaking of communities of color, we are also in the midst of what my colleague Erin Haynes calls the pandemic within the pandemic, just in how this country is really reconfronting systemic racism after the George Floyd's killing. And I'm curious, as a Latina in the U.S. Senate, as a role model for this community, what role do Latinos specifically play in confronting systemic racism in this country?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize it's not about them, it's about all of us, right? So and the work that I have seen over the years and what I still see now is what we are seeing with respect to racism. It's not just where we see it right now in the law enforcement area. It is systemic racism and discrimination in housing and education, in healthcare, in the work environment. It is so rampant, and it's impacting all of us. It is impacting particularly communities of color. So it does require us to step up and say something. Congressman Lewis, who is just going to be a great loss to this country and what he stood for, we could really stand up and do honor to his legacy and memory by doing just what he said, is when you see something that's wrong, then you stand up and you say something and you do something about it. We all have that responsibility. And whatever it looks like for you, but that's the responsibility that we have. And, for many of us, if you grew up going to church in a strong family and people helping one another and you help your neighbors, that just comes natural to you. That's how it should be. And I don't understand why so many either forget that or they want to ignore it and continue to tear our families apart and pit us against one another. So this fight is for all of us. It is about all of us. It is true, and I know this is an old saying, but it is true that high tide lifts all boats, and that's what this is about. We want to lift everybody up, and there's too many that have been left behind, too many that have been struggling right now, and that's the fight for all of us to remember.
Senator, on a more personal note, you mentioned families. A lot of us are having tough conversations over the last many months, whether it's about the pandemic or about racism. Is there something in this moment that has changed you personally some conversation or some insight that you are taking away from, the last several months?
A couple of things. I know it is so hard to get up now in the middle of this pandemic, which has created this economic crisis for many of us. And then we see unfolding before us a civil rights crisis at the same time. And so many people are just overwhelmed, and there's depression, and there's a lot of isolation at this point in time. And the thing that keeps me going is community contact. And what I mean by that is taking the ability to do something in your community where you're still following the guidelines, you're still social distancing, but you're doing good things and identifying in your community those that are still helping others. And that's what keeps me going. And that's my kind of takeaway from all of this is, at heart, there are so many of us that are still good and want to do the right thing and help our neighbors. And there's many of us during this pandemic and during this time are doing just that. I mean, people are out protesting Black Lives Matter, right? People are out helping others that are isolated and delivering meals, volunteering their time, delivering meals. There are so many good stories that are out there that people are engaging in. I think we got to remember that there's still goodness out there. And that, I think, that is going to trump everything else, no pun intended, that we see happening in this country. I have faith that we will get through this because there are so many good human beings still out there that want to do the right thing.
Hope so. Let's talk about November.
Okay.
So let's see. The last time the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House was 2009 to 2011 when Obama was still in the White House. Democrats need to pick up at least 4 more seats by my count to take back the Senate in November. My colleague Amanda Becker has been reporting on some of these toss-up races. So those include races being defended by Republican women, Martha McSally in Arizona, who's considered vulnerable to her Democratic challenger, Mark Kelly. Kelly Loeffler, the first Republican woman to represent Georgia in the Senate. She's running in a special election to keep her seat. There's Joni Ernst in Iowa, the first woman to represent her state in the Senate. And then, of course, there's Susan Collins in Maine, who's running for a 5th term in one of the most expensive races that state has seen. So, as chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, what is your plan to pick up those seats?
So we are actually on our pathway to flipping the Senate. And let me just jump back because people need to understand why this was important. This is what I talked about. We need to put people in positions that are going to move issues forward for this country. In the United States Senate, when your party is in control or whatever party is in control, they control the agenda for the Senate. That means they control what goes onto the floor of the Senate. What has happened in the last 3 years that I've been here is under the current leadership under Mitch McConnell, nothing's moved unless you're trying to put federal judges on the bench. That's it. Nothing has happened. So that was my commitment. Let's get back to a time when we can debate issues on the floor of the Senate. We all come together with different perspectives. We debate it, we find compromise, and we move issues that are important for all of us. So that was my commitment, and that's why I am chairing the DSCC. So we are on our pathway to flipping the Senate to put the Democrats in control so that we can move forward on all of these issues. We have to hold 12 seats where we have some of our Democrats, Senate colleagues that are up. And then we have to flip those states, a number of states, like you said. We are actually have the ability to flip more than 4 states to take back the Senate. What is exciting for me is when we were talking to individuals that were interested in running for the Senate, we were looking at a diverse group of individuals, from women to people of color as well. And that's why I am excited about where we are and what I see in the candidates in those races. You talked about Maine, where we have Sarah Gideon running. Arizona, you have Mark Kelly. We have Iowa. We have Teresa Greenfield running. In Georgia, there's actually 2 seats. We have John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock running, Raphael Warnock. I mean, there's some really diverse folks that have taken that mantle and said, no, this is important for me now, and we're going to make it happen. They fit their states. They are working hard. They've outraised their Senate candidates that they're running against, the Republican candidates they're running against. And most importantly, they're talking to their constituents about the issues that matter to them right now. And I will tell you, Amanda, still the number one issue is healthcare. And when you're in the middle of a healthcare pandemic, it sure is going to be at the forefront of what every family is concerned about. Access to healthcare, coverage, reasonable healthcare, coverage for pre-existing conditions. What are you going to do to make sure that we are all safe? That's still the number one issue. And unfortunately, it is something that some of my colleagues here in the Senate have been trying to repeal and take away. And so people are paying attention to that.
Another issue that Democrats have been gridlocked on in this administration is obviously immigration. That was an important issue when you were campaigning in 2016, and it's safe to say the administration has gone in the opposite direction. What would Democrats be ready to do first thing on immigration if they were able to sweep the House, the Senate, and the White House in November?
Yeah, so this is great. As we take back the majority, we're going to follow through on really our promises to the country when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to addressing the economy, and then when it comes to making sure nobody's left behind. We made, I think many of us, and there's still bipartisan support for this, as how do we make sure that dreamers and their families can stay here, follow the rules, make sure that we put them on a pathway to citizenship. They may not go to the front of the line, but we put them on that pathway, and we look at a way to address our broken immigration system. It's the only way that we know that we can address what we see right now that is wrong, where too many people are being left out. But let me just say this as well. If we are to address this broken immigration system, which I think is a priority and should be for us, it's a win for our economy as well. We know the data, we have seen the impact that immigrants have had in this country and the positive impact that we've seen that they contribute to the economy. And I say there's bipartisan support for this because when I'm in my state, Nevada, and I'm talking to so many people across my state, from Democrats to Republicans, there's support to address the immigration issue. There's support for families that they know that have been here, that have contributing, that have been working hard, that have been paying taxes. They're not criminals. They're not depressing wages. There's no data to show that. But we've got to finally do the right thing here. And that's why there is bipartisan support for it.
Another couple on the election, Latinx voters have gone for Democratic candidates in the last 3 presidential elections, but their turnout rates still lag other groups. And so I have 2 questions for you. What are Democrats doing to get more Latinos to turn out to vote, particularly in a pandemic in the midst where there's so many questions about safety and health? And then the second is, what are Democrats doing to appeal to Latinos who are still inclined to vote for Trump because of their stance on abortion, even as they have a Catholic candidate on the Democratic ticket?
So a couple of things. First, the Latino vote has increased cycle over cycle for election, which is good. Good for this country, quite honestly. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here in Nevada. 1/3 of the population are Latinos, and they came out to vote and they supported me. But what we need to do, that's along with any family, is any voter to get the Latino vote. You got to show up. You got to get into the community. You got to talk about the issues that matter to them. And you will find that many are not just single issue voters. The Latino families that I know, yes, they are religious, and many are Catholics, but they also care about their children and an education and good jobs and wages and a clean environment, so that they have clean water and clean air. There are many issues, just like any other family, and healthcare and access to healthcare. These are similar issues, but we've got to take the time to show up and talk on a regular basis. You don't show up a month out before the election and say, I'm asking for your vote. This is an engagement that happens all the time, and that's why I have done it in Nevada, and that's why the DSCC and we are doing it now. It just requires that engagement and that discussion. And then you talk about the issues that matter to them. and let them know what you're going to fight for on their behalf. I think that is so important. It's true whether you're talking to Latinos, African Americans, Asian American Pacific Islanders, which is the fastest growing demographic in my state, or any family. It is important you just show up and have the conversations.
We're gonna end with one question from a reader, Kathleen Livingston from Jasper, and she asked about the pandemic and the opportunities that can arise in a crisis. She says, after women took up previously male-dominated jobs during World War II, they refused to give up many of those jobs after the war, permanently shifting the demographics of our country's workforce. So her question is, how do you think women can turn the many consequences of this pandemic into permanent positive change for gender equity in the future that we want to see?
Yeah, I think we already are. I think part of this pandemic, which we need to recognize and take advantage of, is really when we are looking to, say, for instance, pass legislation at the federal level to bring so much economic relief into our communities, we should be looking at long-term structural changes as well. We should be looking at long-term benefits and how we address the disparity that we just heard, right? From childcare to wages, to making sure that women have the ability to work and stay at a job and not concerned about their children and the cost of that childcare, or paid family leave, have the ability to stay home and take care of a loved one and not be concerned as a woman that you're going to lose your job. And then just in general, as we're looking at lifting and improving our economy, it means lifting up everybody else so that their wages, they have livable wages. And that means that parity when it comes to wages. And it means parity in healthcare, right? There was a time when being a woman cost you more in healthcare than it did to be a man. Thank you to the Affordable Care Act that addressed it. We don't need to go backwards and repeal that. We need to make sure we continue on the policies that improve and make sure women are treated equally as men in all of these areas. That's why the work that we're doing is so important with these stimulus packages. That's why you see this fight on when we're talking about putting the stimulus money into our communities. It should be long-term. It should be structural changes long-term so that we're having that positive impact. Let me finally say one other thing. What I have seen and I have been fighting for in our communities is telehealth and telemedicine. Well, now we see the benefits of that when we're asking everybody to shelter in place, not only telehealth and telemedicine, but education as well, right? So we need to now make sure that all of our communities have broadband so nobody's left behind. And so that's part of this, when I say long-term structural changes, there's some benefits to it. Because if we get this right, we bring broadband to every community, we can continue that telehealth and that telemedicine or e-education that is so necessary for many of our communities now, even without the pandemic. That's the smart way of thinking long-term, and that's what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, Senator, lots of work left to do, clearly. We are just so grateful that you took the time to be with us here as we're kicking off this summit and our news platform to really examine political firsts, including yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh man, thank you so much. Good luck, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited with the 19th, and I'll be watching.
We are too. Thank you, Senator. Take care.
Thank you to Amanda and to Senator Cortez Masto for kicking us off with that first conversation. Now we're pleased to present this conversation with Senator Tammy Duckworth, an Iraq War veteran and Purple Heart recipient who was among the first women in the Army to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She's also the first Thai American woman elected to Congress, the first woman with a disability elected to Congress, and the first senator to give birth while in office.
Senator, welcome to the 19th Represents. I would love if we could maybe start this conversation with another introduction. We just heard Emily introduce you, but we have another special guest with us today that I would love to meet, for our viewers to meet.
Hi, yes, this is Miley Pearl, my youngest daughter. She's 2.5.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. So
yeah, she's saying hi. So, yes, my mom usually helped me take care of her, but she's at physical therapy this morning. So I've got both girls by myself. I'm sorry. But working mom, working from home.
That's exactly right. That's how it is, and we appreciate you both of you making the time today. We know that you've got a lot going on.
No worries. She put on lipstick for the occasion, though.
Looks great. So we're continuing a day of conversations on political firsts, including yours. You are known for breaking ground as the first Thai American elected to Congress, the first woman with a disability to be elected to Congress, and the first senator to give birth while in office. But I'd actually like to start with a question that I also asked your colleague, Senator Cortez Masto, which is if you would mind telling us about a first in your life, either professional or personal, that is meaningful to you that we might not already know about you.
I mean, at a critical point in my career, I was the first female and I think first non-white maybe commander of my Army helicopter unit, the the Mad Dogs based out of Chicago. So
that sounds like an incredible accomplishment. You are well known for your public service. And before we get into sort of the public service aspect of things and the moment that we're in now, I actually want to go back a little bit further, if you don't mind. Would you be talking about your dreams? It kind of seems fitting with your daughter here. If you could talk about the dreams that you had as a child or as a young woman, if you saw yourself, looking ahead at this point in your life to be here, what were your dreams then? What are your dreams now? And do they include serving as vice president?
Well, I never thought I would be a United States Senator. My dream as a child, I never thought I would be a helicopter pilot. My dream as a child was to join the Foreign Service. I grew up following my dad, who was, he first went over to Southeast Asia as a soldier, and then he served as a Department of the Army civilian for a number of years in Thailand when I was born. And I grew up thinking I would join the Peace Corps or become a foreign area officer, a foreign service officer. I think from the time I was about 9 or 10, I wanted to be an ambassador. So that was my dream growing up. And I was actually on track pursuing that dream when I was pursuing my PhD and decided that, maybe going with the Army could be part of that dream, and here I am.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about your military experience. You are a war veteran. You earned a Purple Heart after being injured in an RPG attack in Iraq in 2004. But your service with the Army began long before 9/11. As someone who has served your country through such significant change, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you saw 9/11 shape the trajectory of this country and how that compares to the moment that we're living in now.
Well, I mean, 9/11 certainly started the trajectory of where we are now. I mean, I thought we would go into Afghanistan and destroy the people who attacked us on 9/11. I never imagined that we would invade Iraq, which really, to me, was never part of what happened on 9/11. And yet here we are. We're still at war. We still have troops overseas in harm's way, and we still haven't really managed to resolve many of the issues that we have.
All right, so I would love to talk a little bit more about your military experience. You are a veteran and a war hero. You earned a Purple Heart after being injured in an RPG attack in Iraq in 2004, but your service with the Army began long before then, long before 9/11. So as someone who has served your country in such significant change, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you saw 9/11 shape the trajectory of our country and how that compares to the moment that we're living in now.
Well, 9/11 certainly shaped the trajectory of our country. I knew that we would go after those who attacked us on 9/11 in Afghanistan, and I figured that would be something we would crush them, destroy them, and let that would be the end of it. It never occurred to me that 9/11 would be used as an excuse to invade Iraq, and now it took our eyes off the ball in Afghanistan. So we were never able to resolve the situation in Afghanistan, and we were distracted by Iraq before we refocused on Afghanistan almost 10 years later. And so here we are, right? We still have troops overseas. We still have people in harm's way. Bye, honey. We're still pursuing these wars. And think about the trillions of dollars that have been spent in Iraq, for example. We sort of diverted our attention, and now we're in a place where we are facing an economic crisis at home. We're facing a global pandemic, and we have spent so much of our nation's treasures pursuing OIF and OEF in such a way that we've not been able to focus on all the things that we need to focus on in America, such as our manufacturing sector, such as making sure that we continue to grow our economy, making sure that we're ready to respond to a global pandemic. All of these things have sort of added up on top of each other, but it's been exacerbated by President Trump, who has refused to act as a president, refused to act as a commander-in-chief, and has botched a response to this pandemic so terribly that's now affected every other aspect of our country, from healthcare to our economy.
Let's talk about the crisis that we're dealing with as a country right now. We asked our readers for questions for you, and several of them wanted to talk about the politicization of the military right now and the militarized response to this summer's protests. So I'm thinking about General Mark Milley's appearance with President Trump in Lafayette Park as the National Guard was tear gassing the peaceful protesters nearby. I'm thinking about Army helicopters flying show of force operations in Washington, D.C. I'm thinking about the National Guard being called in to back up local law enforcement in 28 states. The Pentagon has ordered a review of those actions. What do you make of the military's involvement in summer's protests?
It's a direct result of President Trump's politicization of our military and politicization of all the different agents of federal government. This is what he does, and it's wrong. It's unacceptable. He continues to do it, and we have to stop him. The military is an impartial, non-political arm of the United States that is supposed to be protecting and defending the American people. They should not be used to go out there and suppress peaceful protesters who were exercising their First Amendment rights. This shows Donald Trump's utter failure as a commander-in-chief, that he would do this to the military. And I had a long conversation with General Milley, and he apologized for that, appearing with President Trump, and he said it was wrong. And he's absolutely right, and it is not acceptable, and it should never, ever happen again.
You've also been vocal in the wake of George Floyd protests on the need for national dialogue on national monuments, and you've been attacked by Americans for doing so. How would you define patriotism?
Patriotism comes in many ways, but I think one of the most patriotic things we can do, this is Abigail, my 5-year-old, one of the most patriotic things you can do is to speak your minds. That's how we became a nation, right? It was peaceful protesters dumping tea in the Boston Harbor against taxation without representation. And the most American thing that you can do is to speak your mind and stand up to those in power and make them listen to the will of the people. And frankly, I think it's absolutely wrong that this president wants to stop people from peacefully demonstrating and expressing their personal opinions.
I have to ask too, just about the pandemic on a personal level. Seeing you here with your daughters, so many mothers are relating to you being on this Zoom call with me right now with your kids, and balancing working and taking care of your family, keeping your family safe. Can you talk about how this pandemic has changed you as a person, as a mother, as a public servant?
Yeah, I always knew as a working mom that working families had challenges, and I certainly dealt with them after I gave birth to Abigail and then Miley. But frankly, this pandemic shows how stretched thin people are. I mean, look at me right now, right? I'm home. My one person that helps me take care of the kids, my mother, had to have knee replacement surgery, so she's in therapy. I'm like so many Gen X moms out there, barely holding it together. I'm supposed to be homeschooling Abigail right now. In the morning is when I'm supposed to homeschool her. I can't go shut myself up in an office space and just do all my Zoom calls uninterrupted because I have to be here watching my 2 girls. And this is the chaos of life. But you know what? I am so privileged. I get to work from home. I get to do this and have this talk with you from home, as disruptive as it is. But think about the mom who's working 2 jobs at McDonald's and somewhere else trying to make ends meet, or the single parent trying to hold it all together. It really has You know, I fought for family leave. I fought for child care. I fought for universal pre-K, but this has made it so clear to me how badly we need it in this country, because I live this reality every single day. With all the privileges of being a United States Senator, it's still a struggle. And so just imagine with all of those other working families where maybe one parent has been laid off, they don't know if they're going to make ends meet and if they're going to be able to pay the rent next month or put food on the table. And so when I go into these negotiations, it's with these very real considerations on my mind.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about paid leave, but I'll back up a step and also ask you about schools in particular. I was going to say turning to the fall, but for many, it's a week and 2 weeks away. You were called on by President Trump to serve on his pandemic task force on reopening the economy. I'd like to know, first of all, you know, where do you stand on this question of reopening schools that is down to the wire for so many parents? And if you could expand a little bit more on you know, y'all are in the midst of negotiations right now. What are the prospects of getting paid leave through Congress and expanding the resources that Americans are looking for right now?
Yes. So you see what I'm going through, right? This is what it's like for families right now when schools don't reopen. And again, I want to reiterate, I can work from home. My husband can work from home. But if you had a job where you were a grocery store clerk or where you were a nurse in a hospital or anywhere, you're not going to be able to do this. And so I desperately want the economy to be reopened. I want schools to be reopened, but I also don't want my daughter to get sick and my family members to die from COVID-19, because that's what we're looking at. And until we get testing done in a way that is available, that is low cost or free, and that has results that you can get results back within 1 or 2 days, we're not going to be able to reopen the economy. It has to be widespread. I've said this time and again on this task force that President Trump put me on, but let me tell you, the task force has barely met. They've not really taken any advice from the members, and all they've done is just talk at us. I mean, the first meeting of the task force, the president got on there and talked at us for 45 minutes of a 1-hour meeting, saying how great everything was going. And we all know that's a lie. We all know that's not true. We're now at 150,000 Americans dead, and more getting sick and more dying every single day. And yet he wants to push to open the economy and put kids in school. Well, listen, I want my kids in school too. Not only is it disruptive, to try to do everything at home, it's also bad for her to not be in school. I want her in school because I'm afraid that she's falling behind because I can't do the job of a trained educator. But I can't put her in school unless I know that she's going to be safe. And right now, our schools are not a safe place for our kids to be. They don't have the resources. We should have more money in this next pandemic package to our schools, to our municipalities, so that they can provide all of the cleaning, the PPE, all of the additional things that we need to do to keep our citizens safe. And the Republicans won't put that money in there for school, more money for schools and more money for our municipalities. It's really shameful that they think that they can open the economy without actually doing it in a responsible way, because it's going to lead to a second and a third and more waves of this pandemic, and more Americans are going to get sick and die. And frankly, I'm not willing to let that happen.
I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about women in the military. The DoD's annual report on sexual assault in the military came out at the end of April. And there was a 3% increase in sexual assault cases and a 10% increase in sexual harassment complaints. But it's widely acknowledged that those cases are underreported to begin with. Several of our readers asked specifically about a case close, just up the road from us, Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen, who was found dead 2 months after going missing from Fort Hood in Colleen in April. Her family says she was being harassed by a fellow soldier but didn't report it. What's your take on the Guillen case, and more broadly, what needs to be done to protect women in the military from sexual assault?
Well, everyone in the military needs to be protected from sexual assault. Women are definitely vulnerable and are victims of military sexual trauma, but so are men. There are LGBTQ crimes, so we need to make sure that the military is assault-free. And I actually, in the Vanessa Guillen case, have been communicating with the Department of the Army requesting several things. One, I wanted to know how she managed to go missing, and they never conducted a search for her like they would if a rifle went missing. So let me just say that in the military, in the army, if somebody loses a rifle, if a rifle is missing from the armory, that entire unit shuts down, everybody gets locked down, and they start looking for that missing rifle. They didn't do that for a soldier. They didn't do that for one of their own. They didn't even check. My understanding is the office area where she worked, because it turns out now it was a horrific crime that she was bludgeoned to death in her workspace. So nobody in that amount of time went to check if there was blood residue in that workspace where she was killed. This is absolutely unacceptable. So we're looking at and forcing the Army and DOD to change their policies on when a service member goes missing, what those policies are and what they do to try to find that service member. And then as far as military sexual assault is concerned, it's a scourge, it's a cancer from within, it needs to be ended. And we've been working on this for well over a decade now, and there's still issues. And so we continue to pursue it. I think that we're going to continue to have problems until we have more diversity in the top ranks of the military, until we have more women in leadership, more women who are the platoon leaders and the platoon sergeants and the commanders, and more women 4-star generals, to really force this change to happen. It's incredible to me that she was not able to report the harassment, or that she didn't feel safe to report harassment. I want to know what happened to the sexual harassment and rape prevention program in that unit, because there was supposed to be a program in place where she could feel safe to go report the harassment. And that very much is deeply concerning to me that didn't happen. And I'm concerned that this is across all the branches of government. So we're looking at this very closely. We had an amendment that we put into this year's defense budget, led by Senator Gillibrand. It passed in a bipartisan way. Last year, it was stripped out, and we're hoping that we can continue to work on this well into the future.
A related question from one of our readers, Marianne Connolly from Cedar Park. She wanted to know how the VA could better support women exiting military service, particularly with ongoing battles related to sexual assault or PTSD from their time in service. What's happening at the VA level?
So there's several things that have been changed at the VA. I actually was able to participate in some of these changes when I was part of the Obama Biden administration at the VA. It started off with, I would go visit VA hospitals, and there would not be a single picture of a servicewoman on the walls. We all men. I said, where are the pictures of the servicewomen on the wall? It's like you think that women didn't serve. And like, oh, no. See, back in this back corridor, there's a picture. So, well, you need to make this absolutely clear that, women and people of color serve as well. And then we had to look at how the women's health clinics were being set up, because oftentimes women who were going to the women's health clinic who needed, help with military sexual trauma after effects, with mental health counseling, a regular OBGYN exam, were having to wait in the common areas with all the men, and they didn't feel comfortable. So I said, well, let's have in the women's health area, we came up at the VA with this separate waiting rooms with those women who wanted to wait in a separate area. They could. And then I asked for making sure that there were women veterans in every women's health clinic. There wasn't. And so now VA has been working very hard towards putting in every single VA health center a female veteran, at the very least, in every women's health clinic. And then we have to do things that have to do with how women are being discharged from the military. This is not a VA issue. This is a DOD issue. So a lot of women were released from the military with dishonorable or less than honorable discharges due to psychological conditions or behavioral problems that were the result of a military sexual trauma that happened during their time of service. So we have to change these women's discharge status. We have to upgrade them. And then we have to, at the VA, make sure that they recognize military sexual trauma as a service-related disability, so that these women can get the care that they need for the injuries that they received while they were serving this country. And so it's an ongoing thing. We have to constantly be upgrading VA services to make sure that it is responsive to all of our servicemen and women, no matter their gender orientation, identity, color, where they're from, that every veteran gets the care that they've earned at the VA.
I want to talk about November before we run out of time and talk about voting specifically. President Trump has repeatedly tried to sow doubts about the legitimacy of vote by mail, which seems obviously to be a pretty important way for people to be able to vote safely this year. The reality is that there is no evidence to support the idea of massive vote by mail fraud, but voting is obviously going to be more complicated as states are trying to support both in-person and absentee voting this year. So given the pandemic and that the election is just around the corner, what should Americans expect to be different about voting this year, and what is your party doing to ensure that people are able to turn out to vote and to turn out to vote safely?
Well, we need to make sure that we get funding into this next budget to get out to the states and municipalities so they can conduct voting and voting by mail safely during this global pandemic. Look, President Trump botched his response to the pandemic. We have now, as I said, 150,000 dead Americans and millions more who are sick with it. And he's trying to use that as a reason to delay the election because he knows that he's going to lose. According to the Constitution, he can't delay the election, by the way. And now, after months of him sowing confusion and spreading misinformation about vote by mail, he's actually saying, if you're from Florida, you can do it. It's okay in Florida. Interestingly, that's a major swing state that he needs in order to win re-election. Look, the only thing that's clear right now is that this president is scared that he's going to lose in November, right? I voted by mail from Iraq, from a combat zone. If I can vote by mail from a combat zone, if it's good enough for the troops overseas and good enough for Donald Trump himself to vote by mail, then it's good enough for all Americans. And I think we should have widespread vote by mail so that people can cast their votes and exercise their constitutionally protected rights without also endangering their own lives. If you look at what happened in Georgia in the primaries, you saw people were standing in line for 8, 9, 10 hours to vote in the middle of a global pandemic. We can't have that happen again. And the president can make up all of the lies and all of the about fraud that he wants, about contradicting himself about Florida, but it won't change the fact that voting by mail is safe and it's secured and it works. And we need to make sure that he can't do things like slow down the U.S. Postal Service so that they can't deliver ballots on time, or that he can scare people off and state misinformation about the security of vote by mail. What I say to people is sign up, vote by mail. Our troops are doing it from combat zones. You can certainly do it from your homes here in the United States. And then we're going to work as hard as we can to force Mitch McConnell to put money into the next package to make sure that states and municipalities can indeed carry out vote by mail in a safe and efficient manner.
Another question from one of our readers, Melissa Rule of West Hartford, wanted to know, the theme of the week is obviously representation for us. Why do you think women are less likely to run for public office, and what are you doing to change or encourage women and minority representation in public office?
Well, so there have been multiple studies. I think Emily's List, the group that supports women who run for office, actually did a study, and it shows that women have to be asked to run 7 times before they say yes to running. They just don't think of themselves. This is not a career field that they think about getting into. I didn't think I was going to go into politics. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot and work in the Foreign Service or in the Peace Corps. It's just not what women generally think of as a career field. But women must be encouraged to run, because until we have equal representation of people of color, of different genders, different sexual identities in our government would never truly reflect the American people in an accurate way. And so we are going to have issues that are left out. Not that men can't think about family leave and childcare, but women tend to live that reality every single day. That's why we need younger women, women who are currently raising their children in office, as well as folks from all different walks of life, just the way our country is. And so, you know, we have to encourage more women to run. And I also encourage more veterans to run. And I tell veterans, if you want to run for office, call me up. I will help you. If you want to run as a Democrat, I will help you there. If you want to run as a Republican, that's good too. I will put you in touch with the right people, because we need more veterans running as well. Same with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I'm very proud that this year, for example, right now we have over 40 women of Asian descent running in races across the country for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's remarkable. But we still have a long way to go.
We talked a little bit about the impact of this pandemic on women and women in the workforce. We've been reporting on this at the 19th. I'm sure that many, women, mothers who are listening to you now are inspired, but also so daunted by, the current climate. And so I'm just curious if there's one piece of advice that you had to give them if they're considering running, or one thing that you wish that you had known before you ran. Like, what advice would you give to women who are considering, thinking about public office themselves?
Well, it's a two-part advice. One, you can do it and there will be support for you. You don't have to do it by yourself. And two, it's going to be hard. Don't believe the lie that there's a balance, that there's balance. There's no balance. You're going to be struggling every step of the way, but when you get into office, you are actually going to be able to make change happen and affect the laws of this country, the policies of our neighborhoods and our towns and our cities and our states in a way that will make your family and all the other families' lives better. So do it. But there is no such thing as work-life balance. You're going to be struggling. It's going to be hard, but the end result is absolutely worth it. And what I always tell people is what I learned in the Army: 80% solution. You don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just take that 80% solution and run with it, right? I got on this call with you on time, but I had to do it with a baby on my lap. But that's what you're going to have to do. And you're just going to have to be realistic and be forgiving to yourself. And it's going to be tough, but you can do it. There'll be support to help you every step of the way.
Well, Senator, we have time for one more question, and I would be remiss if I didn't go back to the beginning of our conversation and just give you one more chance. We were talking about dreams at the beginning of this call, and your dreams specifically, and I just wonder if you have anything to say about why you would want or should be the next vice president.
Vice President Biden is going to make that decision, and I'm going to let him make that decision on his own. Any one of the women that have been mentioned in the media are well qualified. It's a fantastic thing to say about the Democratic Party that there's that many of us, women of color, women of all different backgrounds, who can actually step up and be vice president of the United States. That says a lot about the large umbrella that the Democratic Party is. And I'm just Team Biden all the way. I just want to get him elected because my overall guiding principle my entire adult life has been to protect and defend my country. And right now, my country is hurting. Americans are hurting. We need our wounds bound. We need to come back together as a nation. We need a leader with grit, with tenacity, with perseverance, with empathy, who understands those working families that may not be able to literally put food on the table tonight. And Joe Biden is that man. And he's going to be that president who's going to lead us out of the pandemic crisis, out of the economic crisis, out of the global national security crisis that we are in. And so whatever position he wants me to play on Team Biden, I'm willing to play that position because I believe strongly that we need him in order to help solve the many problems facing our country. For me, it's all about what makes America strong, what protects and defends this great nation. And if he says, Tammy, I want you to be vice president, then I'll be honored to serve. If he says, Tammy, the Senate is where you need to be, help me pass the laws, such as universal pre-K, then that's where I'll be. But I'm going to leave him to make that decision on his own. It's a tough one, but he knows what he's doing, and I trust in him.
Well, Senator, thank you so much. You've got a lot of work going on in the Senate and at home, and obviously we are incredibly grateful that you were able to join us for the kickoff of our 19th Represent Summit. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
And up next, we will have a word from our presenting sponsors, Intuit and Goldman Sachs, as well as some trivia to see how much you know about women who have fought for a seat at the table in this country and beyond.
It is a little difficult to navigate as a woman in business, and I think the best way to get through it is just to be aware of the differences and be yourself. For me, how I found how to navigate through that is I just had to be more confident in myself and be more confident in my accolades. It's a very enriching thing to be connected with other women in business. Just hearing other women's stories really just made it more achievable.
When a woman leads a business, she will always have more than one bottom line. Her shareholders are her community. Her success is measured not only by dividends and profits, but by the path she creates for others to follow. Being a part of the 10,000 Women program has made me daring.
We've got an incredible treat for you now, a performance by the Go-Go's, the first all-woman band that wrote their own songs and played their own instruments to top the Billboard charts. The Go-Go's are the subject of a new documentary that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was released on Showtime earlier this month. Belinda Carlisle, Jane Weedlin, Charlotte Caffey, Gina Schock, and Kathy Valentine will be performing their first new single released in 20 years, Club Zero. You've gathered by now that the theme of the day is firsts. And we have a great panel discussion up next, featuring women who blazed their own trail in politics and policy. The 19th's editor-in-chief, Andrea Valdez, will moderate this conversation with former New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez, the first female governor of New Mexico, and the first Hispanic female governor in the country; Virginia delegate Danica Roem, the first openly transgender person elected by the Virginia General Assembly and the first state legislator in the nation to be elected and serve while openly transgender; Congresswoman Deb Haaland of New Mexico, one of the first 2 Native American women in Congress; and San Francisco Mayor London Breed, the first Black woman elected mayor of San Francisco.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, so I'm so happy that you guys are all here with me. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us at the 19th for our summit. So as you know, we're talking about being a trailblazer and being the first. So I thought that I would actually start with a question to you all, and I would hope that each one of you would speak to it a little bit. The question I have is, when you're the first at something, it's wonderful, it's humbling, it's something to be proud of. But oftentimes when you're the first, there's the tension of, yes, I'm proud, yes, this is the moment, and I'm happy to be representative of this, but also, why is this just now happening? And so I'm curious to know from each one of you, is that a feeling that you've had in your particular position in being the first? And Governor Martinez, we can start with you. You're the first female governor of New Mexico and the first Latina governor of New Mexico. And so I'm curious to hear from you just what that feels like and what that means to you.
Well, it certainly is an enormous honor to be the first female governor of New Mexico and the first Latina in the United States. However, with it comes an enormous responsibility.
Yes.
With that comes an enormous responsibility. And with that responsibility is due to, little girls are always watching women. And I think as any grown up, really, just to see how far they can go, that their dreams can come true. But not only is it an honor to be first Latina, it's also an honor to be a governor of a great state of New Mexico. I am the governor, or was the governor, of all of the people of this great state. And so, but I've heard little girls in the grocery store, I did my own grocery shopping, and they'd whisper around and say, "Is that Susana? Is that Susana?" And they were little girls. They were like 7 or 8 years old. And I'm thinking, why do they know who I am? They're the young little girls, and they'd come up and we do selfies. And so there's a huge responsibility to make sure that you pave a path for these little girls that are so, they're realizing that these are possibilities for them as well. And so I tried to do as much as I could with little ones and letting them see that the glass ceiling has been broken. But I often did say to many reporters who asked me, what do you think about the timing? And I said, it should have happened a long time ago. It shouldn't have waited until 2010 for me to get elected and take office in 2011.
Right. And Representative Haaland, you also are coming from New Mexico, and you're also a first. Do you want to speak a little bit to your experience?
Sure, yes. Well, I have to agree with everything that Governor Martinez just stated. It is a large responsibility. One of the first, during my first couple months in DC, I was walking through Statuary Hall, and this young Native girl came up from behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around, and I think it was her and her sisters and a friend and their mom from all the way from South Dakota. They came from the Lakota Indian Reservation. And everybody was in tears. The mom was crying. We were all crying and hugging together. I never had the opportunity to see someone who looked like me in Congress before I decided to run. And so, when you think about it, I didn't have anyone to call on the phone and say, what did you do about this? What did you do about that? Show me the way. And so in that respect, it is a little difficult, right? Raising money is a big part of running for office. There's no question about that. And that is, that's a scary thing. At the same time, when you're first running and you've never done it before, people are skeptical. I'll just say, they're like, can she win? Can she raise the money she needs? Can she amass the volunteers or all the folks you need? So there's all of that stuff in and of itself. But absolutely, every single day, Congress has been in session for 230 years or something of that nature before myself and my colleague Sharice Davids from Kansas were the first Native women to be elected. So yes, sometimes you have to ask yourself, why did it take so long? But not dwell on that too much, because I want to leave the ladder down, and I'll just say real quick, I have stayed true to that. I'm very proud that I help Native women run for office all over the country, and right just on Tuesday night in Kansas, all 4 Native women who ran for their primaries won their primaries, including a Native transgender woman in the Kansas in the Kansas State House. So when when you are the first, yes, you have an obligation to make sure that you're not the last.
Yeah, that's great. Yes. Thank you for speaking to that. Delegate Rome, do you want to speak to your experience?
Sure. And first, that woman in Kansas is Stephanie Byers. I called her on the phone in the run up to her primary. I'm so proud of her. And here's the thing, in Kansas, of all places, Kansas, she's the front runner to win that seat. And that's going to give so many people hope. And when I earned election in 2017, and I became the first out-and-seated trans state legislator in American history, my initial reaction is it shouldn't have taken 400 years of the Virginia General Assembly in its original form, from the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1619 to present day, for that to happen. I'm not the first trans person to live in Virginia. Representative Holland is not the first Native woman to live in New Mexico. Governor Martinez is not the first Latina to live in New Mexico. Mayor Breed is not the first Black woman to live in San Francisco. Why did it take this long? The reason for that is there were systemic barriers to access that are designed for people like us to fail. And if you want to see an example of that, in the Virginia state constitution right now, the amendment that my predecessor authored, banning marriage equality and all forms of legal recognition between same-sex couples, is still there. So even though it's unenforceable because of the Supreme Court, it takes so much work to change something in the state constitution, and that's by design. That is an example of the state government being designed for people like me to fail. And when you look at the rates of the murders of trans women of color across this country, especially, when I've had a very simple resolution this year to just recognize November 20th as a Transgender Day of Remembrance, because it's something that we do nationwide, and we've been doing it since 1999. It's just that a lot of states don't have that as official designation. But, we memorialize, the trans people we lose every year, because of that. 23 members voted no. It passed, and it's now, we're going to start doing it as of this year. But think about that. These are people who I listed by name who died. We can't even honor them. You can start to see at that point that if you're not even to recognize that the lives of murdered people matter, that how is it supposed to be that you're going to end up supporting housing non-discrimination, employment non-discrimination, healthcare non-discrimination, everything from the court system to to electoral politics in general? The system has been designed for trans people to fail. My election, I ran hard on a lot of our local issues here, and something I know Mayor Breed knows, inside and out, and actually Governor Martinez, because you have to deal with it too. When you're dealing with state government, that's your stuff, that's your bread and butter. But when you run hard on those local issues, especially, people realize really quickly that it doesn't matter what the gender is of the person who has the best ideas to get them out of traffic congestion and see their kids in time and without getting charged $5 a minute for overtime on childcare. What I find is that it is important for us to trailblaze so that girls like us can see people like us in positions of leadership, and they can visualize themselves being there, just like Congresswoman Holland was talking about before, and what Governor Martin was talking about before, just when people come up to you and they recognize that this is possible. At the same time, we have to make sure that we are also representatives for everyone, for our entire constituency, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, Green Party, barbecue sandwiches, whatever they are, we have to make sure that we represent our constituents.
That's great. And that touches on a question I want to ask of all of you in a moment, but I want to give Mayor Breed a moment also to weigh in on this, what it feels like to be the first Black mayor in San Francisco.
Well, I got to tell you, hearing from these extraordinary women about their various experiences gives me hope. We all clearly are experiencing the same thing. Yes, it's great and incredible to really be the first, but with that comes a significant responsibility. And as Delegate Rome said, the system is really set up to ensure that we don't succeed. And so it requires us to work even harder to make sure that we break down the stigmas that get attached to us as women or based on our race or our gender or what have you, so that we can really focus on the issues that are important to all of us as human beings and getting past that. And what I also really appreciated about this moment in time is seeing so many women elected to Congress, so many women mayors all over the country. Like, it feels like the momentum for women to be in the places of power where we are really deciding that we are going to make decisions for ourselves. We're going to make decisions about what matters to us. And we're also going to work for the common good of all the people that we represent. I think that's really why it's so important that women are in these positions. I just want to tell a quick story about a young boy who pulled on his mom when I met a bunch of young kids and said, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, can boys be mayor too?" And really, when I heard that, I lost it. I just was so excited because what that says is, you have really this generation of young people growing up, and it's now normal to see women in elected office, especially in the positions that we hold. And so I think that's incredible. And it is an honor, but it also has a significant responsibility to really change things as we know it, to ensure, as our Congresswoman Holland said, that we are not the last one in these positions.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, a few of you touched on this, a question that I wanted to ask of all of you. But it is, how much tension is there, if it exists, between trying to represent for the community from which you come, and that, honors kind of the community you grew up in, maybe, versus the constituency at large? Is that something that you find does come in tension? Or I know that you guys are all representing your communities at large, but you also are a symbol for something from the community from which you were raised in. And I am curious to know how much that you bring that to the table with you in your legislating and policy making. And we can start with, let's go back to Mayor Breed, because you were starting to touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, I grew up in poverty in this city, and I grew up in public housing where I was raised by my grandmother. So the experience that I had growing up still exists for so many African Americans and people in general who are living in poverty in wealthy San Francisco. So I think, yes, on the one end, there are people who are cheering for me in the African American community, but they expect me to make significant changes, which I'm definitely focused on, and which I have done. I mean, I didn't just make plans to transfer police funding to the African American community because I'm Black. I looked at the data and what is happening to the African American community in San Francisco. Over 47% of the homeless population, over almost 50% of the high school dropouts. When we look at some of the challenges that exist in the Black community, we can't say, well, yeah, they're less than 6% of the population of San Francisco, and we're going to make sure that the African American population gets dollars. No,
because they're overrepresented in categories where we are investing dollars, but the changes aren't happening. So it can't be just about being African American. It has to be, of course, about looking at the disparities that exist in a particular population and making good decisions like you would for any population in San Francisco. I grew up here, and this city is important to me, and I am doing my very best to make sure that we are addressing the challenges that exist in a fair and equitable way. It just so happens that, sadly, even when you look at, our trans sisters, they are dealing with some of the worst discrimination, people of color, in particular African Americans, in terms of homelessness and another number of disproportionate challenges. So for me, it's really about making sure that we are doing more and doing something different, because the policies that have existed, the investments that have been made, they have not worked. So it's not okay to continue to do the same thing. We need to make real changes, and that requires being courageous and putting forth policies and financial decisions that are going to make real changes. So it's challenging because, yes, the African American community expects a lot, and then they're like, it's like family. You're not doing enough, but you're doing a lot. And the other part is, well, she's doing this because she's African American, and others are frustrated because they are not maybe getting what they deserve. But the fact is, we are a really great city and equitably distributing resources in a way that is hopefully going to make a difference for people. And that's really been my focus.
And that's interesting. You talked about the percentage of population. I mean, Governor Martinez, New Mexico has a significant Latino population. So I'm curious to know just how that influences you in this particular question.
I view myself first and foremost as an American. I'm an American who happens to be a woman, who happens to be Latina. And in New Mexico, we have about approximately 45% Latinos that live here in the state. We are the only minority majority state in the country. But as governor, I viewed myself as representing all the people, rich, poor, people of color, women, men, trans, everyone who lives within this state, I represent as a state governor. And so I always believed that policy decisions that were data-driven, that were driven by evidence. My background is being a prosecutor and a lawyer, and therefore I always made decisions based on the evidence that was presented in front of me. And as proud as I am of my culture, and as proud as I am of a woman, and being the first to be elected governor of this great state of New Mexico, it's the policies that change lives, the lives of all people, for hopefully the improvements, and improves their lives and those of their children. And so I always wanted to put forth my thinking, my ideas, my policies forward, and let people decide, of all color, of whatever gender you are, to decide whether or not they viewed me to be the one to be the governor of this great state. And so I'm as proud as I am of my culture, parents who said, you're going to get where you're going to go in the future by hard work and commitment. You're not going to be handed anything. And you may not have someone that is an example for you to follow. So you decide what you want to do. You decide how hard you're going to work and what you're going to put into this. And at that time, I dreamt really big. I wanted to go and be a problem solver for folks in my high school. I mean, I was, student body president, and then I went on to law school, and I was a president of, second year class. And then I went on to, be the elected district attorney for 4 terms. And it was what I did and the results I produced that either spoke to the people for my next election or didn't, or got me elected were the ideas of my policy or didn't. I never wanted to be elected because I was a woman or because I was Latina. I happened to be a woman and Latina, of which I'm very proud of. But I wanted my ideas and my thinking and my brain to be the one that was bringing people together and bringing those great ideas forward. It was a long time overdue. It's sad that we're only celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, because it was long overdue that we should have been voting and being a part of the ideas and being a part of bringing people together. This should have taken place centuries ago. However, we are who we are, and we have to celebrate who we are. But we also have to remember that we have a very diverse community, very diverse state and country. And then when we are elected, that we are elected to actually serve them as public servants. We don't serve ourselves. We actually serve the people that are in our entire state or community or city or the country. And of that, I am extremely proud of.
Representative Holland, I'm curious to know what you think about this.
Thank you so much. So, you know, being the first Native American woman, I mean, tribes are unique in the fact that they're sovereign governments. And so they're not like, you know, other constituents, so to speak. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the country, and each of them are sovereign nations. And so the relationship between the federal government and Indian tribes, it's a government to government relationship, and the United States has a trust responsibility to tribes. So, so having somebody in Congress who truly understands that and has lived it, it's helpful, I think, to not only to my colleagues in Congress, but tribes across the country. You know, they look at my office as one with an open door. And so absolutely, I love my district. I love District 1 here in New Mexico. We've got, you know, it goes all the way past the Sandia Mountains. I've got farmers in the South Valley. I have farmers and ranchers, you know, in the South Valley and here in the northwest part of Albuquerque. We've got lots of small businesses of every size and you know, industry. And so I realize how important it is, and I am dedicated to representing my district. And I, you know, and I realize that being a first, it's an opportunity, and I believe it comes with the responsibility of, you know, making sure that I am taking on, you know, the other issues that Indian tribes have been trying to, you know, push for a very long time. So I want to say that, you know, sometimes I understand that as the first Native American woman in Congress, there is an expectation on me, not only by my district, but by women and tribes across the country, to be somebody that I could move their issues forward. And that's something I was optimistic that I could do. And it's something I have done over the last, so far, over a year and a half. The thing about Congress is that it's representative of our entire country, and we want Congress to look like our country. There having never been Native women in Congress, that was an important sort of milestone to overcome. And so I think that, and I'm a 35th generation New Mexican, I should say. And I love my state immensely. There's no place I'd rather be than sitting in my kitchen where I am right now, and you know, and just being here in the state. So I think as far as my district goes, folks are proud that they were responsible for sending one of the first 2 Native women to Congress. They trust me to balance their issues along with tribal issues across the country, and I'm very grateful for that. And I just think, you know, it does take somewhat, you have to think about a lot of things at one time. I think they're very supportive of the fact that they understand there's a multitude of issues that we need to contend with. I have wonderful staff who understands that, yes, we're going to have more than just our constituents coming into my office at any given time. And so we're committed to ensuring that that our door is open, not only to everyone in my district, but also to Indian tribes who feel that they can see themselves now in Congress.
Delegate Rome, I'm curious to know your thoughts here too.
So I'll tell you a story I haven't told anyone yet. A few weeks ago, I was visiting my partner and my stepdaughter in And in order for me to get to their place, I have to park about half a mile away, and I got to walk because they don't have visitor parking there. And so I park my car. It's late, it's dark, and I look in the rearview mirror, and I had my hair in a just regular ponytail. And I usually don't do that in public during the day because when you look at my face, it exacerbates my dysphoria in terms of my jawline. And if I wear it down, I don't have as much of an issue. If I wear it half up, half down, also not much of an issue. I've got my white mask on and everything, like, you know, like doing full. And I even thought to myself as I'm looking at the river, I was like, yeah, it's late. I don't really feel like having to do my hair. All right, just go, just do the walk. It's 12 minutes, you'll be fine. Get out of the car. 30 seconds. By the time I walk out, I hear this one voice yell, "Is that male or female?" And then I was like, wait, what was that? And I turn around, and that person says it again, now to another person. And they're looking at me cold. And one starts walking. And so I just go, okay, I'm too far away to get back into my car to get there safely in time if they were to come up to me. And then I also realized I've got a long walk here. And so I got on the phone. I call my partner. I said, baby, I need you to pick me up. Can you come pick me up? Can you meet me somewhere, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to run. I'm not going to be that person. I just said, you know what? No, I'm just going to walk like with a sense of purpose. I'm going to walk down this trail. I got picked up and my partner brought me back. And then I just had a moment. I'm reminded of what it means to be a trans woman in America every day of my life. I'm reminded of what it means to look at a Zoom call, not just like this, but a ton of other ones where I have to wonder about how is the light reflecting on my face to determine whether people will see me by my gender or they will see me on my sex assigned at birth. I have that constant presence that I navigate day in and day out. And as a state elected official, I know I have to be vulnerable enough to be visible in order to do my job, in order to inspire other people to do something like this. And at the same time, I also know that how ingrained the roles of men and women and non-binary people even now are in this country is so severe that the way that women are perceived is the difference between whether we are seen as safe and potentially someone who can be pushed over, or if we are too strong, if we're too ambitious, if we're too something, because that doesn't fit into the standard box of what femininity is supposed to be in terms of being submissive, in terms of when men talk, we stop talking, we get interrupted, their voices are louder, and then we quiet ourselves. All of that is something that everyone on this call knows about and has dealt with before. And we are used to being talked over. We are used to being interrupted. We are used to all that. But here's what it means in terms of remembering where you come from and where you're going. Our strength is in our unity. Our strength is in our numbers. As women, if we can support each other, if we can make sure that when one of us has an idea, a good idea, that the rest of us are amplifying it, that the rest of us are coalescing, and that we're supportive instead of jockeying for space in that particular case. Because one of the things I think also happens for a lot of women is that as you grow up and you realize that you want to be able to succeed, you also realize that there is this arbitrary yet real, very real cap on how many women, especially diverse women, can be in the room at the time decisions are being made. We have a woman here, look how 50% men. Oh, well, we have a person of color here. And well, who's your, I have a colleague who I'm friends with who happens to be a person of color, who happens to be a woman. Sure, I talk to people who are not like me. We live in this world of per capita. And it's almost like, in some cases, women can feel threatened, and minority groups in general can feel threatened by having another person like us in the room because we might get shoved out, as opposed to where it should be, which is when there are more than one of us in a room, now we have someone to bounce ideas off of. Now we have someone who can support us and we can support them. Now we have more of a worldview being represented that's not just based on one person's lived experience, but based within the community. And so I guess I want to close on that by just saying that the trans experience in America is not a monolith. If my skin tone matched Mayor Breed's and I lived an hour and a half north of where I live right now, my life expectancy would have been met on September 30th of last year when I turned 35. I have to keep that in mind. And it's the statistics that's extremely sobering. And at the same time, I also realize I'm in a position to start to change that and to advocate for people who've been left out, who've been left behind, because in our society judges some lives as more valuable than others. If you look at examples of when the death penalty is used, for example, it's not used for murders against people like me. Some lives are more valued than others, but we've got to get to a place where Black lives truly matter, where Black trans lives matter, and we are actually judged as equal. We are actually judged according to what we can deliver and what we can bring to the table, and by the merits of our ideas and by the content of our character.
Thank you for sharing. There was another point that was touched on by, I think, all of you at some point, and I just wanted to throw this open if there's a particular challenge that you guys, that each of you wanted to maybe speak to. I don't know if that's a story that kind of exemplifies a challenge and that you overcame. You know, Representative Holland, you were talking about fundraising being a challenge. I thought that was interesting and something that I had not thought of. If there was another challenge that, any one of you has seen that you would like to weigh in and just talk about something that you had experienced, or, a story where it really was, it really was clear to you that you were the first and there was a challenge as a part of that, but, something where maybe you were able to overcome that.
I'll tell you a very quick story. I ran on a platform, of course, of balancing our state budget. We were in the deficit, and I needed to make sure that we had a balanced budget, just like every other family that lives in this state, in this country. They need to balance their checkbook, make sure that they are paying their bills, et cetera. And we had a deficit. And so that was one of my platforms, is balance the budget and let the businesses know that we're not going to keep coming after you for more money, because we wanted to make it, and we're an open for business state. And yet the first week that I'm in office, I'm getting ready for my legislative session, and I had a senior senator come up to me, and he came into my office and he said, "Well, darling, just need you to know, I know you promised you weren't going to raise taxes, but, now you're in office and it's just time that we raise taxes and just move on." And I remember thinking, I just campaigned for 16 months and gave my word. I did not say things that I thought they wanted to hear. I said things that I wanted to carry out during my term as governor. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, but I keep my word. And in 8 years, I never made it more expensive for a single family to live in New Mexico. But it was interesting to see that someone with such ease would come in, just happened to be a man. It could have been a woman, but it happened to be a man who came in to say, you can give up on that promise. You're in office now, you won. And you can go ahead and go back on those commitments that you made to all the people throughout the state. And we're a very rural state, so there's a lot of travel and a lot of meetings with lots of folks. And I said, no, I'm not going to take the easy way out. And, I'm going to disagree just a tiny bit with the delegate, because I'm just strong-headed. And I did a lot of courtroom cases. And so I had a loud voice in the sense of hopefully commanding with my ideas and with what I was saying in the courtroom, that I wasn't going to be allowed to be silenced in the sense of, I can come together with men and women, and I can come together with people of any, either gender, any color of your skin. Bring me your ideas, and then let's pull those forces together. If we pull those forces together, and we're pushing our hand down and raising up others who want to do the same thing with great ideas, and little girls that want to be in office and be trendsetters themselves, and that's what we should do. But I believe strongly in pulling great ideas together and never make a promise that you can't keep, or explain thoroughly why you can't do it, because the amount of situations have changed, i.e., for example, what's happening with us now with COVID. And I understand the situation may change, but I was grateful to keep my promise that I balanced our checkbook for 8 years and never asked any more from our families in New Mexico. But it was funny. It just took a week for someone to try to get me to back out of my promises. And I said, no, sir, with great respect, I'm going to disagree with you. And I went on.
Well, Governor, I just want to say, I wish it were that easy to put forth ideas and have people come to the table and in the right spirit to work with you, because sadly, that's really not been my experience here in San Francisco. Even, in trying to reach across various political spectrums. I mean, we're all Democrats for the most part in San Francisco, but there's a very extreme left component. And when we talk about, like my experience, for example, has been, just first when I ran for Board of Supervisors in the community that I was born and raised in, I was told, look, you should probably move to the Bayview where there are more Black people so that you can actually have a real chance. And I won that election. I put forth the kinds of policies that you would think anybody who cares about progressive policies would actually support. And it's always met with a lot of animosity, with the sincere desire to see me fail. And it's really sad, and it can be really toxic. And it's rather than, try and work with someone who actually has the experience of growing up in poverty or has the experience of discriminatory practices and a number of other things, rather than trying to work hand in hand. Sadly, as a member of the Board of Supervisors in a lot of cases, and as mayor, I've seen the opposite. And even when you agree and support their ideas, it's really challenging, and it's really frustrating, and it's disheartening. And so on the one hand, yes, there are incredible experiences that I've had, like you described, where people genuinely care about coming together and working together. And sadly, in the world of politics, sometimes, and I'll be honest, with white liberal progressives in San Francisco, it's been quite toxic and divisive and really frustrating, because we all care about, I think, some of the same things. It's just, the fact that I'm in the position and I'm the one implementing those ideas, even though they claim Black Lives Matter, even though they claim they care about, people who have grown up in situations like I have, they still, unfortunately, do everything they can to undermine my administration, which sadly undermines the people that we're here to represent. So it's been quite a challenge.
And I will say, just as a final comment on that, everything that's worth it is not easy. And of course it's a challenge. And it's one that you are consistently and persistently and always trying to bring compromise and or discuss, or at the end of the day, you don't give up your principles, but also at the same time, you don't give up on having those conversations with other people. So I understood the challenge. I mean, I've had it since I was young. And I'm just determined never to give up on that possibility of always bringing people together in the great hopes that life just becomes better for those that we represent.
So I'd like to mention something about the courtroom in particular and the criminal justice system for a sec. About, I guess, a year or so ago, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine. She's the prosecutor, Commonwealth's attorney in Henrico, and her name is Shannon Taylor. And she said, Danica, there's a trans woman who is, basically, she's on the stand, she's been charged with blank. And the judge is refusing to identify her as one, refusing to call her she or her, and is refusing to show her such basic respect, to the point that she is choking up with tears and she's not answering questions because she's so bothered. And so eventually, when that case was then transferred to another judge, the next judge was doing it to her too. And this is someone where I hope, and one of the things I can't stand in general is the idea that trans people are supposed to have passing privilege or we're viewed as cisgender in the first place. But this woman clearly does. And yet she was still being talked to and demeaned like that. She doesn't have the option of having a bold, affirmative voice of standing up for herself when she literally can't even speak, when she's being demeaned by the very people who are determining her liberty and her freedom. And then I got an email from a woman whose girlfriend was incarcerated in a man's prison in Bland County in southwestern Virginia. This person was forced to have to shave her head and was being dead named, misgendered, and everything that go along with that, just for the agreement of being able to talk to her girlfriend on the phone. She was forced to shave her head, which there's no rhyme or reason for that. She shouldn't have even been there in the first place. And if you know anything about the experience of a trans woman in America, not everyone has the ability to grow out their hair like I do. Not everyone has the ability to have passing privilege to have X, Y, or Z. But for a lot of us, this is the last thing we got. When you're locked up, when people are denying you HRT in the first place, when people are denying you all the basics, this is it. You're lucky if you get a tweezer. You're lucky if you have anything else to just show feminine expression, just to have someone view you like this. And by the time her girlfriend got on the phone with her, she said, I have never heard her so broken, where her voice was dropping 2 different octaves because she was so defeated and suicidal. That's how trans people often go through the criminal justice system. We are demeaned from the time that we get there, and from the time that we're processed, we're treated as other, we're treated as less than, and we are treated according to how other people see us as opposed to who we are. And so I just want to mention that, because that experience and that dehumanization is what leads to having to have a Trans Day of Remembrance in the first place, to commemorate the people who die. It's really severe for a lot of people who are like me. And I hope that the conversation that we have really does the best that we can, especially as women in leadership, to uplift those voices of vulnerable people who really, really need help and just need a fair shot.
And I can't agree with you more, that the justice system is meant to give a voice to everyone. And I worked with some of the most difficult cases and the most difficult situations where their voices were meant to be silenced. And having that experience made me, as a prosecutor, I was the judge, but to say, no, you will treat this person with respect. I treated those accused in the courtroom with respect. I was expected to. And it is what I wanted to do, because the purpose of the courtroom is to seek the truth and justice. It is not to demean people, and it is certainly not intended to silence them either.
Representative Holland, we have a minute left. If there's anything that you would like to share before we sign off.
Sure. Well, I think we were talking about barriers or hurdles, or is that so? I think the barriers happen before many of us decide to run for office, right? You know, you could ask a man to run for office and he'll say yes the first time. It takes a woman 7 times. The statistic is that most women, you have to ask them 7 times before they say yes. So I mean, I ran for office. I didn't even have a savings account. I had lived paycheck to paycheck, and it was very difficult for me. But when you feel when you are called to lead, you are ready to work your heart out and make sure that you can be a voice for trans women, just like Danica is talking about. I felt very strongly that we needed people in office. One of the issues that I've worked on since I've been there is missing and murdered Indigenous women. That was barely able to break through any media reports. You know, somebody would die, a Native woman would die, and she was, you know, part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis, and she wouldn't even get an article written about the murder for a week. You know, in Congress, I will say that I don't have, I mean, there's 435 of us, so we're all making decisions together, and we're moving legislation forward that we think will benefit our country. And I have to say, probably the most frustrating thing for me, the largest barrier that we face right now is when we pass legislation in the House, it never gets on the Senate floor. We pass hundreds and hundreds of bills, and many of those, the vast majority of those bills, have not been heard by the Senate. And one of those is the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization that we absolutely need to get passed. So I feel like the reason we need more people like us in office is because we have to lead by our values. We have to lead by what we've been taught as women, as New Mexicans, as Virginians, as, you know, members of your community, where you're caring about everybody and not just through a political lens. Because right now, when I think about the Violence Against Women Act not getting passed, the Equality Act not getting passed, the Pay Equity Act, where, you know, so many women are getting paid less than men in this country. Trans women of color have it the hardest. And so I feel like if for any reason we need more women in office, it's to make sure that we're moving these issues forward. And so, you know, I'm proud to be, they called 2018 the year of the woman. I don't think we get 1 year. I think we get many years. I think 2020 is going to be another year of the woman. And so we'll just keep moving those things forward. We need more people in office who know what it's like to struggle to make ends meet, so they can put themselves in the position of folks who we should be fighting for.
Well, I think that is a wonderful place to leave it. And thank you all for joining us, and our viewers, I'm sure, will come away from this conversation inspired and informed. So thank you all again. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks to our panelists for that extraordinary dialogue, and thanks to everyone who participated in and followed along with our programming today. It was a magical start to the 19th Represents. If you liked what you saw today, we'd love it if you'd join us as founding members of the 19th. We're a member-supported newsroom and can't put on programming like this without your support. Even $19 helps. You can make a gift at 19thnews.org. If you missed any part of the program today, or you want to rewatch, visit 19thnews.org/events. You won't want to miss tomorrow's program, where we'll go deep on suffrage, from the unequal history behind the 19th Amendment to the modern-day fight to extend voting rights protections to far more Americans. The lineup includes voting rights activist Stacey Abrams, readings by actors Meryl Streep and Zoe Saldana, and a panel discussion on the unequal history of suffrage for women of color, with the New York Times Magazine's Nicole Hannah-Jones, the Black Futures Lab's Alicia Garza, Voto Latino's Maria Teresa Kumar, and author and professor Martha S. Jones. A special thanks again to our generous sponsors and philanthropic partners: Goldman Sachs, Intuit, The Impact Seat, the Lenfest Institute, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wincoat Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Stardust Fund, PEN America, the Heinz Endowments, CVS Health, the Panacea Collective, Aero PR, and Lingua Franca. We'll see you back here tomorrow.